Dr. Sutton, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Faith. Thank you for the invitation.
So we are doing an investigation on hair relaxers. As we know, hair relaxers has long been marketed to Black women to either, some people say, control or relax hair pattern, curly hair pattern, to chemically straighten their hair. There are now some lawsuits linked to several different health issues, including uterine cancer. What specific chemicals in hair relaxers could be linked to uterine cancer?
Great question. So what we know so far is that there are these endocrine disruptor type of chemicals, and they tend to be phthalates and parabens. And what they can do when someone has them repeatedly applied to their hair or their scalp, or sometimes they can come into your body in other ways as well, they basically do what is in the title. They can disrupt your hormones. And depending on what type of disruptor they are, they can disrupt to the level, the cellular level, which is where the DNA is at. And that's why there's been a lot more attention paid to them lately, because if you are disrupting at the cellular level, you can cause, or at least be associated with, different GYN cancers.
And I know some people have questions as to what exactly in the relaxers is causing this disruption. Is this something that's still being investigated, or is this something that's known within the medical community?
You know, we know about the endocrine disrupting chemicals, but there are so many different ones. You can have some that are tied to straightening the hair. You can have some that are tied to the fragrances that you might get in certain chemicals, or even hair dyes, or even some shampoos. And so there are a range of chemicals. There's an ever-growing list of these chemicals. You know, in places outside of the U.S., the list might be 3 pages. In the U.S. so far, I think the list is about 1 page. But we're continuing to learn more and study more and really give women as much information as possible so that they can have information to make choices about what they would like to do or not do.
So, Dr. Sutton, are there any specific types of cancers? We know we've talked about uterine cancer. We've also heard that ovarian cancer could be linked to these products, or any other type of symptoms such as fibroids that are linked to these products that are well known within the medical industry right now.
Yes, so all of the above. So far, based on the scientific data that we have, we know that some breast cancers have been linked to these chemicals, some ovarian cancers, and more recently, more uterine cancer information has come out. So there was a study, one of the strongest studies done to date actually, was published in about 2023. It came out of Boston University, and basically it was strong because rather than looking backward and getting information from women who were trying to recall what had happened, they followed over 40,000 women starting from like 1997, and they followed them through the 2000s, and basically they looked to see who developed uterine cancer. And when they looked at it prospectively, they did find that there was an increased risk of developing uterine cancer, and that risk was almost doubled among Black women. And it was also, the risk was increased amongst postmenopausal women. So women who were already done with their childbearing years.
And that leads me to my next question. I was going to ask you about that exact study that did show that increase among postmenopausal women. What is the link to a person's age and their risk? And of course, we know that both women who are have not hit that moment in time yet are still have used or could be still using relaxers as well right now.
Yes, so when we consider postmenopause, so menopause in this country, actually around the world, the average age is about 51 years old.
Yeah.
And so when we are looking at that, if someone has gone through menopause in their early 40s, they still can fall within that range. So rather than considering an exact number, we just say postmenopausal. So if they've not had a period or a cycle for 12 months, then they are considered being in menopause. And so one of the things that the data also shows is that the length of exposure is important, right? And so if you have been getting relaxers since you were a little girl, and now you are menopausal or postmenopausal, that can be close to 40 years, sometimes more for some people. You know, as an example, I think I got my first relaxer when I was 18, and I got relaxers up until age my early 40s. And so that length of exposure is important. And if you're getting relaxers several times a year, whether it's every 6 to 8 weeks, that's important. Or I think the cutoff in the study, if you got it at least 4 times a year, you also had an increased risk. So definitely the length of years of exposure, how often you were exposed when you were getting relaxers, all of those are important. Mm-hmm. And let me also add, it's not just relaxers, it's some colored hair dyes, bleaches, and some of the studies, they even look at, what we do for our edges, the chemicals that are in the things that we put on for edge control. Mm-hmm. So there are a wide range of products that we're still continuing to learn about that can have an impact on women's health. Yes.
For those, like you said, some people start getting perms and relaxers. Like I think I was 4 years old when I got the first relaxer in my head, right? Mm-hmm. Because my hair was what some would say unmanageable, and I was tender-headed and couldn't sit to get my hair combed out.
Yes.
So for those who have been exposed from such a young age, they might not have reached menopause yet.
Right.
What is the thought and the kind of studies on those younger women as well?
What we're encouraging everyone to do is really just to be informed. And so if what you love to do with your hair, if what brings you the most joy in terms of how you manage your hair is applying a chemical relaxer or hair dye, what we're recommending is that you at least learn what the chemicals are, mm-hmm. what's in them. And there are different apps these days, different websites that you can go to, and you can look and see, okay, well, is this chemical that's in the box that I have for my product, is this chemical one of the ones that's listed? That's one of the approaches some people are taking so that they can get the information and then make an informed decision. Hey, do I like this style enough to keep using it, or do I want to switch to something else? For those who choose to switch to something else, what we recommend is that they explore products that have more natural contents. Things that don't have those chemicals listed in them. One of the challenges we have in not only this country but in many places is that not every single chemical is listed in the products. But you have to start with something, right? So you start with the side of the box, you write down or look up the different chemicals that are in there, and then whether it's your own online research or whether it's talking to one of the medical specialist that would deal with this would be like a dermatologist, someone who does a lot of intense research on scalp conditions and all of that. Yeah. And so that's what we would recommend. Get the information, seek guidance, try to make sure you understand in detail what you're putting on your hair, and then go from there.
And I mean, it's so interesting that you say that, because relaxers for so many women is a necessity. Yes. When it comes to their hair care. Yes. And some people, they hear the risk, but for them, this is all I know, this is what my mom did, this is what my grandma did, yes. and this is what I've been doing for 20 years, right? Yes. What do you say to those people who, this is something they've been doing for years and years and years, it hasn't hurt them yet, so why should I stop now?
I love the quote, when we know better, we do better. And so, so to the extent that having the information at least gives you more than what you knew before, I think it's important to consider it in the context of the big picture. So if the big picture is that you love what's going on with your hair, it's important that you understand that the scientific studies and the data don't equate to causation, they just show association. So if you're using the chemical relaxers and all of that, it doesn't mean 100% you're going to develop this cancer. It just means that the studies that we've done so far show an increased risk for certain people. In general, the risk of, for example, endometrial cancer is about 3%, or uterine cancer is 3%. So what does that mean? Everyone who's part of that 3% hasn't necessarily used these products, but again, it's important to have the information to understand. If you are someone who, like me, decided to go through the transition and stop using relaxers, there are many women, probably within the last 20 plus years, who started to try to learn more about that journey. So if that's something that interests you, if you're trying to come off of the chemicals and use things that are more natural, then talk to friends, talk to your hairstylist, talk to professionals, talk to a dermatologist if you've had scalp issues, and explore what might be the right path for you. Whether it's a protected style, although, as you might know, Faith, some of the protected hair products that we use are also coming into question lately. But really, it's a matter, I think, of being as informed as possible so that you can make the best decision for you. Whether it's rocking your natural hair and doing so proudly, or you know, putting in a relaxer to slightly alter your curl pattern, or sometimes it's not even about the curl pattern. Like you said, it might be related to, you know, what job you have, or if you are an athlete and you need to have something that doesn't require a whole lot of upkeep, it can be something that works for you as well. So I think it's really important, and this is something that I've learned as I've talked to different women, patients, and friends and family. Understand what the person needs their hair to do, and understand what context they're trying to optimize their hair care for. And I think once you have those questions answered, and once the person is aware of what is in the products that they're using, it helps them come to some type of resolution and plan about what's best for them.
Yeah, and I mean, it's so interesting because everybody, even black women, right? Every black woman's hair is so different.
Absolutely.
Even though it could have that kinky curly texture, it could have a relaxed curl, and it's not a one size fits all thing. Let me ask you this, what symptoms should women look out for if they're concerned that their relaxers could be contributing to a potential cancer diagnosis or other health issues?
Great question. So of the cancers that have been studied so far, in terms of what we know about these associations, for breast cancer, the number one thing we can do is get annual mammograms. The recommendation is for most people to start by age 40. If you have a different type of family risk or history, then it might be appropriate to start even earlier. What we know about uterine or endometrial cancer is that if you are a woman who is postmenopausal, if you've 100% had no menses for at least 12 months and then you have bleeding, which is what we would call postmenopausal bleeding, you should absolutely be evaluated. One of the things we would need to evaluate for and rule out or rule in would be a uterine or endometrial cancer. And that's, it's not a really invasive thing. It can be done at the same time as a Pap test. And so while the speculum is in, after the cells are gathered for the Pap smear, a little small device can be introduced into the uterine cavity, get a sample of that, and you're able to screen for uterine or endometrial cancer. For ovarian cancer, you know, it's historically been one of these cancers where the symptoms may not present themselves really early. But if you do have symptoms such as abdominal pain that's been kind of chronic, you start feeling fuller sooner when you're eating than what you might normally have been. Or if you have bloating that's different or unusual for you. Those are certainly some things that should make you reach out to your provider, whether they're an OBGYN physician or, you know, nurse midwife, PA, whoever is your care provider, and just let them know what your symptoms are. Absolutely, if anything feels off to you, and I say this to women all the time, if the person you're seeking or talking to as a provider is not listening or following up the way you think you should be followed up, absolutely find someone else. It's okay to get a second opinion, third opinion, just to make sure you're getting your questions answered, and if appropriate, a test that can help answer some of those questions, including like a uterine ultrasound or a blood test or a biopsy.
And I know you touched on this, but I just wanted to go back to it. Is there a certain age group that's at more risk than another age group when it comes to the potential link between hair relaxers and cancer? And I know that this also might have to do with what you were saying before, how much you actually used these treatments.
Yes. So for uterine cancer specifically, we know that study showed a strong association with postmenopausal women. So to the extent that most of those women are going to be probably in their late 40s to early 50s and beyond, that would be an age group to really pay attention to if they notice some bleeding that has happened after they've stopped having their cycle. But one of the other things that's been interesting over the last few years is that more and more younger people are testing positive and developing these cancers. And so it does become really important to do that annual screening exam. You know, it used to be called the Well Women's Exam, whatever that annual test is for you, where you go and you touch base with your provider just to do an assessment, say, hey, you know, this is how I'm feeling. This symptom here is different from what I felt last time. do you mind us talking through it, or what would you recommend? Would you recommend any additional screening? So it is absolutely something that we have to keep in mind, that age should not be definitively the only thing that should trigger thinking about that possible diagnosis in someone, especially as we learn more and more about younger age groups being impacted.
So just making sure you're staying current on seeing your doctor.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah. What steps can individuals who have used hair relaxers in the past, or some of them might still be using, what could they do to try to minimize their risk of developing a cancer?
Great question. So a lot of people might go cold turkey. I think the important thing to do is to start researching what alternative products might be of interest to that person. If they have been using something and exposed for 20 plus years or something like that, and they would like to make a change, then start researching things that do not have those chemicals in them, whether they be at the grocery store that they like going to, or a small brand that is known to just use products that are all natural or that don't have any extra chemicals in them. I think that's the first step, to just find what alternative product might work for them and go down that path.
Here's another question I'd like to ask you. We know, depending on what research you look at or what article you read, hair relaxers have been within the Black hair care regimen for decades.
Absolutely.
Why do you think it's just now that we're learning about this connection between relaxers and cancers? And I know a big part of it was that study you had referenced at Boston University, I believe. But why has it taken so long to dig into this and uncover this?
That's a great question. I think it has to do with some of the trends that we started seeing maybe 20 to 30 years ago. I think also you have to think about, well, what type of research is funded? What type of research is important to people? What type of research questions are being asked? And then who's asking those questions? It's important to consider the diversity of the researchers who are asking the questions, because it might be it's more commonly the case that someone who might have experienced something with their hair products, or who may have a family member that was diagnosed with something, that person might be more likely to ask that research question. And so what we've seen over the last 20, 30 years is, as more people have embraced more protected styles and embraced more of their natural hair care, I think we started to see an increase in these research questions being asked, and people really trying to understand, okay, well, what's going on? And if there is something going on, can we tie it together based on science, so that we can know for sure whether or not something is impacting something, or whether or not there's an old wives' tale. So tying it to the science and data became really important for folks, so that they could use the science and the data to tie it to policy, and then have that policy inform how people choose to use the products or not.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's almost like if somebody's not in the room, or if somebody's not at the table asking that question, maybe they have not had any, if you've never had any interaction with hair relaxers, would that even come to mind as this could be a connection? You have formaldehyde or other chemicals in this. Oh, this could be a connection to what we're seeing here.
Absolutely.
Is it kind of along those lines?
Absolutely, absolutely. And then if you ask that research question, like for example, who's funding the research? So the study that we've been referencing out of Boston University was funded by NIH, National Institutes of Health. And so it's one of the organizations in the country that has really big pockets when it comes to being able to support research that can answer these big questions that we have that can impact health and health outcomes. And so, who has the ability to fund these questions when they come up, who has the ability to successfully apply for the funding, and then be able to do the research in a way that is unbiased for the most part, and then can inform people and influence policy in a way that people can really hear and understand.
And would it take research to eventually move the needle on regulations for these products to not have these potentially dangerous chemicals in them?
Absolutely. I think what we've seen over the last few years, if you look at how things have happened, so we have some of the research that started popping up, and then you have the research that informed some of the policy. So we have the Crown Act. The Crown Act was largely possible because there was enough science for people to say, hey, in addition to people wanting to feel empowered and wear their own natural styles in workplaces and other professional spaces, we also have now science that shows that they could be doing themselves harm if they are applying these chemicals based on what is being required at certain professional spaces. And so I think, yes, to that extent you have the science that can inform the policy. We have Crown Act, and as you know, and your watchers probably know, the Crown Act basically says at a federal level that you cannot be discriminated against if you wear your hair in its natural state, for mostly black and brown women or black and brown people who might be wearing their hair in a way that hasn't traditionally been seen as professional in certain spaces.
Yeah, absolutely.